Marvel, PlayStation, and Insomniac Games announced that it will no longer be creating any new additional story content for Marvel's Spider-Man 2. This comes a year after the game has been released, and it was revealed that Sweet Baby Inc. worked on this game. It also comes as they announced that the game will be coming to PC in January, and we will see how this game fares over there. We already know that it had half the sales of the original Marvel's Spider-Man, so it does make sense why they are not creating any more content for this game on a number of different levels. But let's break this down here. Before we get to this, I'd like to ask you, please hit that subscribe button, hit that bell for notifications so you don't miss any of our future videos here at the Trent Report. I wrote this up over at thatparkplace.com. You can find the link in the description below. You can also find an option to become a member of the channel here and support my work. Would greatly appreciate that. But let's get to the story right here. Insomniac Games announced that it has no additional story content planned for Marvel's Spider-Man 2. They did this just ahead of the release. It was done in a blog post on marvel.com. Where they announced that Marvel Spider-Man 2 will arrive on PC on January 30, 2025. The PC version of the game is being developed by Dutch developer Nixus in collaboration with Insomniac Games, PlayStation, and Marvel Games. As I said, there will be no story content. This is what they said. While we have no additional story content planned for Marvel Spider-Man 2, we're delighted to bring all of our previously released post-launch content to the PC version, including New Game Plus, new suits and color variants, photo mode features, and more. So they will not be following the model of Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, which is still releasing additional DLC and story content for that game. I actually got to get back to that. It's been a while since I've touched that, but I know I saw something they released new, or they're planning new Daima DLC for that game. So back to Spider-Man 2, though. This announcement comes in the wake of Sony revealing that Marvel Spider-Man 2 sold less than half of what Marvel's Spider-Man did. In a recent Sony financial report for its games and network services segment, slide featuring Marvel Spider-Man 2 said this: great success for a major PlayStation Studios game series and category. It went on to reveal that the game sold over 11 million units. You can see that right there, 11 million units in the left corner right there. And they're describing it as a great success. I'm not sure if you can really describe it as a great success, especially if you're comparing it to the first game, which we do know sold over 22.6 million units after a massive data breach happened over at Sony, and sales units were leaked, and they were leaked to Reset Era. So this was at the end of 2023. So almost a year ago, the 2018 game Marvel Spider-Man had sold 22.685 million units and had net sales totaled of 827 million. You can even look at Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales. That game sold 11.125 million copies and had net sales totaling 427 million. So the sequel to a game that sold 22 million units only sold about the same as the 2020 Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales game. I would not call that a great success when your bar is already at 22 million. Usually with a sequel, I think you would expect those sales to actually maybe go a little higher. But I think people saw the writing on the wall with this game even before they realized that Sweet Baby Inc. was attached. And just kind of to give you a little bit of a comparison, we're going to look at movies here. We can look at Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Its revenues declined by over its revenue didn't even decline by over 50% compared to previous Ant-Man films. That film grossed 463.6 million worldwide. The original film grossed 518.8 million, and the sequel, Ant-Man and the Wasp, did 623.1 million. So that's right, the sequel actually did more than the first movie, but obviously Quantumania did indeed go down, but it was only a 10% decrease from the first film and a 25% decrease from the sequel. Nowhere near the 50% decline that we are seeing here from Spider-Man to Spider-Man 2. That is a massive, massive decline. Even if you adjust for inflation, the first film grossed 663.4 million and the sequel grossed 737.3 million. And so you're still looking at a 30% and a 37% decline. Still nowhere near that 50% decline without even adjusting for inflation there. Obviously, it would be hard to adjust for inflation because we don't actually have the sales numbers for Spider-Man 2, we just have the unit numbers, but still very, very bad sign, I think, for the future of this franchise. And again, I think it's one of the reasons why they are no longer creating any more story content, because I think people have kind of soured on the game line that they had going here, the story that they created for Spider-Man 2. So just to reiterate here, I do think 11 million units is a significant number of sales, right? That is a really good number. But if you're comparing it to the first game, you're comparing it to Miles Morales, I think that is obviously below expectations on what Sony was probably looking for this game. The fact that it was over 50% lower is not good. Like, this game should have been at least around the 20 million mark, or I think even higher, potentially 25 million. You thinking you've got a really big hit with Spider-Man, you're going to continue with that in Spider-Man 2. But no, they did Miles Morales, dropped the sales by half there. And then Spider-Man 2 comes out and you're at half of the sales again of the original game. And you're just looking at the same as Miles Morales. So not good at all, in my opinion, when looking at it compared to these other two games, and not just in a vacuum by itself. Because if you do look at it in a vacuum by itself, 11 million units obviously is a really good number. So I think, obviously, given the game sales were so far behind the original game, it makes business sense to end development, given the returns will likely not be as high, especially if you're trying to sell that. You have a smaller pool of people who are actually going to be purchasing that potential DLC. So you're not going to be getting as much bang for your buck as you might have for, say, if you were doing it for Marvel Spider-Man, where you have at least 22 million people who might be purchasing that DLC that you're creating. On top of that, PlayStation Studios head Herman Holtz announced in February that Sony and PlayStation were laying off employees at the game's developer Insomniac Games. He said that there will be reductions at Insomniac Games, Naughty Dog, as well as our technology, creative, and support teams. He explained the layoff, saying, delivering the immersive narrative-driven stories that PlayStation Studios is known for at the quality bar that we aspire to requires a reevaluation of how we operate, delivering and sustaining social online experiences, allowing PlayStation gamers to explore our worlds in different ways, as well as launching games on additional devices such as PC and mobile, requires a different approach and different resources. So obviously they were laying off people. So I think that probably has something to do with why they would not be creating any more additional content either, given the fact that their staff has been cut. Now, it's unclear exactly who at Insomniac Games was let go. Was it their story team? But I think regardless, like when you're creating DLC, it takes a team, right? You got to get the story, you got to get the programming, you got to get potential level design. There's all kinds of things that go into that, and obviously that would affect them. And he goes on and kind of provides more explanation on why he was laying off people. And then I think this is a big factor right here too, right? This has been the story of 2024. Gamergate 2.0, whatever you want to call it. Basically, gamers just closing their wallet to any kind of woke ideology. And Sony is very well aware of this, right? They've seen what happens with Helldivers 2. They've seen their sales with God of War Ragnarok be less than half, or the peak concurrent players less than half of God of War, which indicates I think sales are probably less than half on PC and Steam as well. And I think a lot of it has to do with this Steam curator list right here, Sweet Baby Inc. Detected, which was created by Brazilian gamer Cabrutus Rainbow. The list, as I wrote this article yesterday, had over 451,000 followers, closing in on 452,000, 451,883, closing in on 500,000 gamers basically saying we don't want games attached to Sweet Baby Inc. Spider-Man 2, obviously, was worked on by Sweet Baby Inc. So I think this probably played a factor into this, as well as why they are not creating any more story content for Marvel's Spider-Man 2. And then we can even look at, as I mentioned, God of War Ragnarok. You look at it, it did just release to Steam last month, and it did not even get to half of the peak player counts of the 2018 God of War game, which released to Steam in January 2022. God of War Ragnarok hit a peak player count of 35,615 about a month ago after it arrived on Steam. And then God of War hit a peak count of 73,529 when it released in January 2022. That's a decline of 51.5%. And we can just jump over here real quick. This is the Marvel Spider-Man Remastered that was released to Steam on August 2022. You can see it hit a peak of 66,436. I think if we follow kind of the trend we're seeing with God of War, that Marvel Spider-Man might be a lot less than that. We might only be seeing it around the 30,000 mark. I actually think it's going to be a lot lower just because I just don't even see that. I think the Spider-Man 2 sales were so much lower than the original Spider-Man sales that it could even be even lower on Steam here. So I think potentially in the 20,000, something around there might be where we see Marvel Spider-Man 2 peak when it arrives at the end of January. And then another factor I think probably playing into the decision to not make any new story content is they are working on Marvel's Wolverine, which looks like an absolute disaster, but that is a video for another day. So I don't think this looks good for Marvel's Spider-Man 2. And I think the fact that they're saying that they're not making any more story content, I think shows that they're kind of moving on from this. And we'll see if they even make a third Spider-Man game. Obviously, they've already made 3 with Miles Morales, but maybe a third in the line. We'll see. They're obviously doing the Wolverine game. And I think that game already has a tough row to hoe, given the fact that it is already kind of tainted by Sweet Baby Inc., tainted by the ideology. There's already some ugly character designs of Jean Grey. It looks like you're playing Jean Grey a lot rather than Wolverine in a Wolverine game. So there's some obviously probably some feminist ideology being inserted into the game as well. And it just doesn't look good whatsoever. And we know Sony is one of the biggest purveyors of this woke ideology. It's all over their website. They're injecting it into a lot of their games. A lot of their own studios have it. Concord being the biggest example and having a massive, massive L earlier this year after having to shut the game down in just 2 weeks because no one was playing. But let me know what you guys make of Sony, PlayStation, Insomniac Games not creating any more story content for Marvel's Spider-Man 2. Let me know in the comments below. Remember to always be charitable, especially to each other, but to always speak the truth.